there definitely is a lot of public interest in honeybees and saving the honeybees, which is great. I love it. It's great that people want to be active and want to be a part of something to save a species that we depend on right now. It is also important for us to realize that we have native pollinators that certain plants might require at a certain time of year in order to properly flourish. And that's something that I'm always talking about, because I really don't want people to get lost on the fact that we also have native pollinators, but the honeybees are extremely important for human survival and for agricultural production.
Honeybees have a lot of challenges to overcome. They're kind of in an epidemic. Making sure that these colonies stay established kind of is saving a lot of our environments. Making sure these plants stay pollinated will ensure that the vegetation continues from generation to generation.
There's so much to learn from the bees about like life in general. The biggest thing I've learned from it all though is like Mother Nature is totally unpredictable. It's just mesmerizing. Nothing can be measured. It's like everything is so wild but in tune at the same time.
About a little under a decade ago, while building a farm, I was interested in honey production. So I just watched some YouTubes on honeybee removal and read some articles and just went out on my first removal, fell in love with it, and then just snowballed into where I am now.
Erica Thompson actually played a huge role in that. I joined the bee club my first semester that I was here, and she was hosting a guest lecture for one of the meetings, and I attended it, and just the way she described like her interest in bees and how she interacts with them and how she kind of made it a living, that really interested me, and it really inspired me to kind of get to know more about them and get more involved with them. Within the bee club, I was staying pretty active, and I was getting hands-on with the bees on campus and learning how to manage them. That taught me a lot, and it also showed me what it was like to be hands-on with them. I came into contact with one of the former bee club members. His name's Cody Hughes. He runs Buzz in the Hills. I volunteered with him for a summer, and I just kind of fell in love with it.
Lexi was part of the Texas State Bee Club, and then through that we were taking care of some of the hives that were on campus. And then it slowly became a hobby. We slowly started meeting people that needed help with their bees. And so we reached out to help them. And then it slowly grew over the years. Like more and more people started calling us. We started getting referrals. And then we looked up and we were like doing it all the time. I slowly started doing more and more beekeeping. And then I was like, dang, we have like a little business. And so we got everything filed and got like registered as a small business and have been doing that for several years now.
I would say I'm a bee removal specialist. When I do remove a hive, I will relocate them to an apiary away from people out in the country in a field, somewhere where they can do their thing, feed and build again. And then on top of that, I help create apiaries for folks to either have their own apiaries for honey production or for agriculture exemption.
What I do is I help people get their agriculture exemptions. People get tax exemptions, and then I will maintain hives on their property. And so what I'm doing is I'm increasing bee populations without having to take resources from the hives, while creating a valuable service for people to get involved with pollinators and bees.
In Texas, you can get ag exemption from cattle, from goats, some counties from pigs, and just any agricultural endeavor depending on your county. But across the state of Texas, if you have 5 to 20 acres, you can get agricultural exemption on your land, not your homestead, but your land, from bees. And it's a great opportunity for people to get ag exemption on their land without potentially decimating the fields or the meadows that they have with goats or cows. If they don't have enough space to properly manage those animals, bees are a good substitute for that.
I think it's a big thing that people are getting into, especially more recently. People are finding out how important the bees are, and comparatively raising bees to raising cows it can be a lot cheaper, In some areas, as far as the forage for the cows themselves, they're actually having to bring food in, and it ends up burning a hole in their pocket trying to keep the cows alive.
Honeybees have a massive industry where commercial pollination exists. So I think the statistic that's widely thrown around is 1 in 3 bites of food that we get from the supermarket is pollinated by bees.
In order for certain crops to be pollinated, you have to have pollinators. Some crops are pollinated by wind, and some are pollinated by pollinating insects. And so when we grow crops on a scale that's so large, you can't have that wild pollinators aren't able to physically live there. We have to bring in a pollinator, and it's either humans or honeybees. And so honeybees are extremely important in that role of pollinating our large-scale agricultural crops.
Pollination plays a key role in not only development of the food, but also the amount of food that a crop can produce. So a lot of farmers actually will pay beekeepers to bring their bees in for one specific crop at a time. And in doing so, they get a lot more production and a lot bigger yield.
With that, we see a lot of problems. That's what you see a lot of the colony collapse disorder when, that was a very newsworthy topic. That's where you were seeing a lot of that information coming out of, was from the industrial agricultural beekeepers, the migratory beekeepers, people that are having to run a 18-wheeler full of bees to California to pollinate an almond crop, and then up to Washington and Oregon to pollinate some berry crops, and then over to the east for soybean, and over to the even east of that for another crop. So that's where you're seeing we were seeing most of the large problems where it was in that sector. On the smaller scale, people like myself that will watch and take care of 10 hives here and 10 hives there, and smaller outfits, you don't see those losses. You don't see the losing 30% of the hives, or I don't see personally losing 30% of your hives a year at whatever site, and I don't see rampant pests and disease move through my hives like a lot of has been reported in those migratory beekeepers businesses.
Honey itself is a multi-billion-dollar thing, just the honey. The bees themselves, you have orchards and farms that rely on them year-round, and without that, the farmers would not see nearly as big of a yield.
Traditionally, a lot of the beekeeping in the United States is focused on honey production, which can actually be pretty detrimental to honeybee populations because you're taking a large amount of their resources out of the hive. You're not setting them up to flourish in terms of the winter, or in general, you're not setting them up to grow.
Some of those beekeepers will harvest the honey. So say they go get a great almond, they take their bees to go pollinate an almond orchard. Well, they can harvest all that almond honey, and then they will feed their bees corn syrup or sugar water. So in turn, you're taking away this complex nectar that the bees forage for. When they reduce the water content down and creating creating honey, that's their natural food source, one of them, along with pollen. And then when you take that from them and you give them something as simple as sugar water or corn syrup, it's not what they need to fully thrive. It doesn't have all the complexities that their honey has. So that, along with also exposure to fungicides, miticides, herbicides, and pesticides from all these different locations that they're traveling to and from, all those little things adding up, I believe, and a lot of other people believe, are the reasons why you see those declines in large scale yards and migratory beekeepers. And that, I would say, shows the industrial aspect of it. When you're sacrificing health for a profit or for a business endeavor, which I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it's not good for the bees, but currently we have to do that in order to sustain our country's food demand.
If the bees go, we lose a huge portion of our day-to-day foods, and then in turn, everything else will skyrocket. Farmers lose jobs, and so it's in our best interest to help the bees thrive and do what we can to give them homes whenever we can.
So the main goal that I'm kind of pushing as the president is we want to spread more awareness about not only honeybees as pollinators, we want to spread more awareness about native pollinators. We do believe in beekeeping and honeybees, However, we also like to stress the importance of planting more plants native to the regions that you're in and seeing what kind of hosts those plants provide for the native pollinators that are attracted to them.
There is slight concern as the amount of people that do get ag exemption with bees, as that number grows, there is a thought and a concern with some beekeepers about competition with local pollinators. You know, there's only so many flowers out there in a certain square mileage. And we have a lot of local pollinators, butterflies, bees, wasps, pollinating flies, all these things that are serve very valuable roles in our ecosystems. And if they are outcompeted to a point where they can't potentially reproduce properly and keep their numbers up or growing, then that could be a problem in the future. I'm not saying that it is a problem right now, but it's something that has definitely came to my attention and I've thought a lot more about over the years. So every year with the ag exemption clients, we turn in our numbers of hives that have survived the year, how many hives we have on site, and working with certain counties and county agents to get them this information so they can see, you know, some areas they don't have enough forage for the bees or pollinators in order to sustain a certain number of hives. So, you know, hopefully they can start to relax on those required numbers a little bit so people aren't, you know, constantly throwing hives out on properties in order to keep their ag exemption.
You do have to keep in mind, like, whenever you bring in X amount of bees here, you got to think about, well, they are, you know, foraging on stuff in the area that something else would be foraging on. So you kind of have to keep everything in balance. But by creating those bee homes and doing that, you're definitely helping them out. So we definitely want to do our part to keep the native bees in mind as well.
We need more organisms that kind of align within our symbiotic relationship. That way we don't have to create human intervention to keep these pathways going. There's a very dense web of organisms that kind of hold up an ecosystem, and the more that fade away from existence, the more likely you're closer getting to like a desert, you know? So that's kind of a big reason why pollinators are so essential.
Do some research, look up online, just Google native pollinators to your area, plant some flowers in your yard, plant some native flowers in your yard. Anything to kind of break that food desert that a lot of pollinators see in cityscapes. Learning about them is the first step. Learning about their habitat, learning about their food source is definitely a first step what people could do.
A lot of people don't necessarily know how to support bees beyond, you know, supporting beekeepers. Though supporting beekeepers is a really great way to support bees, you know, I don't think I can overstate how much planting just a little garden with a little bit of native vegetation in it, that goes a long way for a lot of pollinators. Getting a little dirty with nature and making a little garden can go a long way. It creates a lot of new habitat for insects and it invites a lot of biodiversity, which I really appreciate.